Good evening, everyone. Hopefully the volume is good today. Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. And today we are fighting it out to check on some secondaries to get some new things. We're in that rotation where we're doing Mish-Mashing today, basically. And interestingly, have found ourselves starting off with a character that is one we expect to see later as well. We expect to see just fine playing Poison today to the point where it was confusing when this came up, but fortunately, one, because Just Fine does occasionally play this character, and because PoisonBot is relatively available on this side, the main problem that Kansuki Dynasty is likely to happen here, is the fact that she has picked V-Skill 2 today. Not because it's a terrible idea, but because using V-Skill 2 against Poison is so much harder than using V-Skill 1. Even considering that Poison can just hit you out of V-Skill 1. Because this is not a good enough whiff punish, whereas Cammy's normal stuff is a good whiff punish without having to worry about whiffing or mistiming or badly executing the spiral arrow. Now, she can of course solve this in the normal way she solves things by Cammy, which is dive kick. She's a fan of dive kick, she's quite good at dive kicking, mainly because she doesn't constantly try to dive kick. So she has a generally unpredictable dive kick and is willing to just make you block forever. But she's probably rusty on the execution of dive kick, which is going to be a problem as we go. Fortunately, the opponent seems to have chosen the form of Poison V trigger that leads to combos, but is not likely to just catch her randomly off guard. So this should be fair enough as our first match of time and warm-up, basically. You can expect a full lounge today. This is character select on. And we're probably returning stream to visibility in a moment because we do all the full thing in a minute. There we go. That's a matter of audio cues, and for some people, as I noted in our stream of Under Night over the weekend, for some people audio cues is a big deal. For a lot of people audio cues is a big deal, but the specifics of how loud it has to be can be a thing too. If you're a tournament player and you find sometimes yourself fighting at a setup without sound, or just sound not working out too great in general, you're gonna have some problems if you're that type of player. But we're now seeing the Poison strat just coming back out naturally. Lots of whiff punish, arrow, forward heavy kick at max range, crouch heavy punch, but not necessarily trying to dive kick a ton, which is probably good because, again, rusty. And there's one benefit of this style. It doesn't tend to take a lot of meter to deal with Poison from Cammy's side, allowing you to keep that option open for a big conversion when you really need it. This is absolutely one of those matches where you're being zoned out and you can't focus on the fact that you don't have the life lead, because the tools you have, the different things you use to get it back or win the match, are very heavily meter dependent. In those sorts of matches, therefore, it's absolutely to your benefit to keep on making your opponent block. maybe the end of our flicker is now. Looks like we've got a relatively low bar Lucia, but this is Atlantic Rim as a lounge thing in general. Not ready? There we go. Took a while. This is Atlantic Rim. Basically, if you are anywhere on the realm of the Atlantic Ocean, please feel free to join it. You will definitely have good connection to someone, and we're not super picky about the lag unless it's affecting you. It's definitely true that higher ranked players can afford to make sure every connection is 5 bars in ranked or casuals and so on, but our content is obviously geared toward people who either don't have this option, can't play as much, want to rank up and get lots of different experience and learn how to handle the situation. Overall, it's not as simple as, well, I just won't play anyone with bad connections ever. Did they change V-trigger is going to be the question here. Nakali is much more effective against poison with V-trigger. Well, there's V-trigger 1, so. Nakali is less capable than Cammy in this regard, but it does allow for a lot of hitting of stand heavy kick, a common thing. One useful thing you've just seen already happen. Placing Crawling Beast down, Kali's V skill 2, can cause weird interactions with the Poison's Whip, and therefore protect the character as a whole. For many reasons, this is not actually a strong strategy, but it'll definitely keep you in the game when you've been pushed out and don't know what else to do if you have time to put it down. This character therefore plays a lot from the perspective of, oh, I think I'm going to retreat a little bit just to get out of range of Poison's Whip, so I have time to do something to shield myself or get control of a situation. This is particularly helpful once the Crawling Beast is already down, even though you'd think, well, why would you be retreating again then? Mainly because Poison will trade as long as you're moving, and you don't get to jump because then she can hit you without having to do the low attack in the first place. If you've got no options though for how to reach her or cause problems, you're going to have to look for some space. Definitely this is useful because I guess Just Fine is able to watch this player's concept of how to play this character, and of course while it's not necessarily going to be a thing you just copy, it can help you understand what it is you want to do that's different from them enough to clarify, oh, I should try this more, I should try that more, I definitely don't do this and I can see the spacing that is required for that to work, that's why it doesn't work for me. Those sort of little things are hard to look for when you don't necessarily have that much experience, but you can learn to watch matches in that way.
Round 1. Fight! Poison wins.
My mind is still capable only of thinking of that move as EX Backdash, which is why it's better not to have commentary. It's still a little weird to find yourself going in, oh no, he goes for the EX back that way. No, that's not what I'm supposed to say. Your alternative is of course pressing up V shift, V trigger, and V reversal. So, still, I'm a little closer.
Let's do this.
Is it just taking long? Oh wait, no. Right, character select is on. Easy to forget, since we nearly never have Mish-Mashing with that setup. The president has returned to playing G, whether that is because of the incredible new costume, the matchup, or just going back to roots, let's say, will be hard to know. But for now, we get to see G versus Poison. And technically, give Just Fine even a little bit more information.
Round one. Fight.
I'll be hanging around in the actual lounge today, probably actually playing as well. Give the theme, likely you'll see Colleen. Depending on what people need, maybe you'll see Bison. As the style used by myself and Just Fine are so different, that it can be useful to others to get a different type of experience. Though my Bison style is unorthodox and doesn't generally do well at higher levels. Lots of the time, training against higher level players is not what you need. It is often joked among team members that we're the opposite of the standard concept in that regard. We're reasonably good at fighting, not generally beating high-level players, because we're trying to do the same things they're trying to do, just aren't as good at it. Most lower-level players don't get as easily defeated because it's more so understanding of the situation, which we can have, and then execution tests, making a lot more influence on the matchup. But that's a matter of finding more time to practice, and this is some of that time. It looks like this particular Poison player, however, would fit right in because they don't seem to have the I'm just repeating things, even though this character tends to do a lot more of that than many, just by the nature of her flow. But they're definitely playing more so in terms of, okay, I am looking for this moment, I am understanding what needs to happen now. I'm going to try to keep the spacing advantageous to myself.
Final round. Fight.
This is super interesting to watch for me because I have access to both stations, but because the characters tend to have the same interactions over and over, the fact that we're a whole roundedly synced doesn't seem to make any difference. Oh sure, it comes at separate times, but since the round starts were synced up for a little bit there, there was at least some period where they basically just did the exact same thing both rounds. I have a desync of almost exactly 30 seconds between the two, which is probably the max that the game will easily do. Okay, so the odd situation of being able to look back at something that's happened a little bit.
Poison wins.
And now it jumps to the other side, and now I have a better look on one than on the other.
Round one.
For those who
Fight.
saw on the tweet that we were going to be talking about RoseBot today, that is definitely still happening, and relatively soon. I'm actually more so waiting to make sure that a certain set of things has happened and we won't have any problems with the stream. And of course taking the time to talk mildly about the characters you're seeing. The use of that as an anti-air is impeccable. But got caught stepping. I was literally about to call him the King of Steppin', but I'm sure he'd be offended by being called the King of anything. My intention to spend time talking about Rose is also the reason why you're not getting my usual pile of opinions, matchup notes, and explanations for this particular matchup. But if President continues to play G today, we don't have any reason to end stream particularly early, so we're almost certainly going to see more of this as we go. One note though is that our poison player is falling into the space that happens when one has a G that is willing to play patient and move out of your range without necessarily rushing back in. You can't just catch G. And most of the time you'll be spaced against such that you can't do it.
Fight.
But it looks like they've already got their strategy in mind. They can absolutely put the whip out and try to advance first. But this move requires you to choose beforehand which whip you're going to do when you do advance. So you have to guess, before you even start moving, what your opponent is going to do to try to get to you. If I had to suggest something to them, it is that you can actually use her upward kick to advance just to fill space. because it will allow you to build meter way more easily and basically not get hurt for it. Because you only need to move forward a little bit at a time, and if your opponent keeps on backing off, you're just building up free meter. This is another option. Realizing, I don't actually have the life lead, but I'm not necessarily going to be unable to get it in the time I've got. Oh, that was a good interaction on both sides, honestly. There we go. There, that was the moment you needed right there. That was the changing moment of the match. Understanding that you can use this move to barely defend yourself against certain things, even if it's just by luck. And still shift the situation just enough that your opponent won't know exactly where you are or where you're about to be when the move recovers. Which is much more important than getting close a lot of the time. Especially with a character who actually has this much range. But even for other characters who are much shorter range, as long as they have a good enough dash, your goal in these situations is generally not to get to your opponent, but to make your opponent not know exactly where you are in phase 1 of your approach. And then move on to getting in from there, because now, rather than a predictable thing happening that they have an easy counter to, they have to probably deal with most, if not all, of your options, and if your character is decent at it, they won't be able to do that. Characters that have difficulty doing this usually have enough zoning ability of their own to solve the problem. Which is the thing that most people don't understand is very important, as a difference between characters like this form of poison. She had better fireballs before. As in any. And Falk, for example, though Falk has something. And the rest of the cast. If you can throw an actual fireball that will go the entire distance of the screen, you have a lot more options than if your fireball stops short, moves slowly, other little things like that. Characters like that can use them as a shield sometimes to do the same thing, get a little closer and mess with the opponent's expectations of where they are. So, it does fill the space of an advancing move with confusing ranges, but you do have some advantage to just being able to throw Sonic Boom, throw Hadouken, fill that entire spot to force your opponent to take an action, even if it's just blocking, during which they can't counterattack you. So I guess we're about to see Jasvine's take on this match, but that's going to be important no matter what she does. It is important to do the kick when your opponent is so far away from you that you can't just advance. She also tends to be a much more sedate person though, so it's quite possible that this is going to be a very relaxed walk down style situation with more jumps. And the President's plan therefore should be to get presidentiality as high as possible to make the fireballs more effective and increase the effectiveness of the wheel kick as well. Of course, part of this is the fact that G actually can't very easily get presidentiality except by doing that, which is a good plan, honestly. If you are going to do that sort of thing, you can absolutely cancel into the charge off of nearly anything you do, so just fill up space like that. Had to spend a lot of meter for that one, but it did work out.
Round 2. Fight.
Poison has no immediate mid-range way to build up anything other than that kick I mentioned. So if she wants meter to get into a situation that benefits her, she can become a little predictable about it unless you're filling the space with your opponent's filling your opponent's head with so much stuff that it doesn't matter. She can absolutely manage that though, so looks like the president has shifted to, okay, I'm getting closer to you because I know you can do this. Which means we're getting to see a different form of this matchup. Which means also that I have less to say. And we'll probably move on to what I said I was going to talk about in our tweet. Ooh, dropped it. But I had the spacing and the understanding of what happens after dropping it to still get the finish.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight!
I should really find out whether or not that would have worked, but the invincibility on any move she could have done is not necessarily going to be enough to reach. The move starts a bit further forward than you'd expect for a super that advances like that, so you don't have a couple frames where things are fixed. Okay, it looks like President has dropped back, probably has not so great connection all the way across the pond, as they say. Which is technically perfect timing, because assuming this player plays Lucia, should she even play Cammy in that case? But there's no way to know if they're going to play Lucia, so... Looks like we are going Cammy Lucia. As I said, can see from. Spinning attack is also probably not the best V skill for this matchup. But these sort of things matter And that's why they get trained during Mish-Mashing, because you can remember that while you can change your V-skill and V-trigger before a match in ranked, if you mess up and don't remember to do it, you have to be able to play still. Casuals, of course, same thing.
Round one. Fight.
But while I technically could have quite a bit to say about this matchup, it's a lot of stuff more so talking about Kansuki Dynasty's mindsets and playstyles, which I talked about quite a lot already, and it's not going to be terribly different than what I say for most characters she faces. So, let's go on. We're talking about RoseBot today. For those of you who tend to try to get our bots early,
Fight.
or build up something to test with for yourself, and the disc guidance segment isn't always all of the information you can get. Depending on the character, it can be really difficult to pick it all out. The bot page doesn't help either because it doesn't tell you a lot about alternate ways to do something unless the bot itself has a lot of actual variants built in. Fortunately, with Rose we have a lot more options. With Dan, it was basically a given that Dan's normals were not going to look like Dan's normals in other games. This is primarily because all of the Shoto style characters, of which Dan still technically counts as one, all the characters who wear that particular gi, and Sakura, have specific ways of having their normals animated for the purposes of it being easier to deal with in older games. You might get their physical hand position look slightly different, and the frame data could be different.
Round one.
But for the most part, hit boxes and hurt boxes, for the sake of simplicity and not making your players really mad, didn't change up that much. Dan's normals, even in Street Fighter 4, didn't look all that much like they do now. But we were able to see that from early on as well, and know, okay, Dan is going to be a matter of understanding how his normals work, and how they've incorporated his taunt. Both of those things took some work once the character was available, but not so much that you couldn't just get it. Rose is even easier because anyone who has played Alpha 2 for the most part, although it's relatively similar in Street Fighter 4, if you played Alpha 2, for the most part you know Rose's normals, and they don't appear to have changed the general flows of those normals. Which means you could just test it out that way, and I've been building these for a really long time, just in very weird ways. Back when Alpha 2's training mode used to let you do not this, but if you tried hard enough, you could get weird things to happen. It's just a matter of hiding which thing and learning rhythms. It's sort of like playing music, or technically like playing two different songs within each other, and only one of them can be heard at a time. That's generally the principle of where these come from. I just take that same thing that I've been doing for a really long time and cut it up into 5 to give you even more randomness and better training time. Of course, that was so long ago that I can't claim to remember with any certainty. Not like I've ever been able to save those on a Street Fighter Alpha 2 setup from however long ago. And I definitely was too young to think that I would one day need it. I'm not even sure that's even age related. But knowing Rose's normals means I can use my current ideas of how to do these things to pull up new concepts for her.
You lose.
Rose's zoning seems to have been bumped up a bit. And it's going to matter quite a lot whether or not her Soul Spark, whether or not the sash pushes the other player back when the move is done. For anyone who was wondering, that match was not particularly laggy that I saw, and therefore we're going to continue because the 3 bars doesn't seem to mean anything. We have the usual, you can play in Europe if you want, feel free to hop in. If your internet is good, stability is what the new Street Fighter Robot netcode seems to require, much more so than ping. But that's always been true because that's how... We knew that from the time Guilty Gear hit. We knew that, oh, you can play from like across the world if your net is good enough in terms of stability. So, get yourself an Ethernet cable and go for it. We are seeing Alex today for this matchup, which is probably the worst possible choice because Alex can't do anything to Lucia basically ever. Lucia mostly just has to put out a specific thing with the expectation that Alex will try to use an armored move and either block or neutral jump it. This is an almost inhumanly good strategy in this matchup, to the point where your real only option with Alex is to try to get to the trigger and deal with it from there. Fortunately, most of the time you have just the very tiniest moment to actually do this, and you can learn to time it. But on top of all of that, she has a really, really large reaching, possibly EX anti-air. And she can just spend all of her meter on her EX uppercut. Hurricane Spinner will not only knock even Alex out of stuff, but doesn't necessarily mean that he can get a lot of good punishes. So this is basically more so that this player hasn't chosen to just go for that yet. In a way, this is saying that DeWolf doesn't know the matchup. So you can watch for that. Generally in Street Fighter games, Rose wins out by hitting crouch medium punch. They probably took away the oppressiveness of her crouch medium punch. But they can only do so much. After all, people will be really upset if she just doesn't get to use it. Your main problem with this character is you can't get close enough to her. She'll push you out and then use Soul Spark, which often pushes you further. Since you're technically already within the range of being attacked, unlike most projectiles, and the projectile itself doesn't usually come out until the Soul Sash is extended, there's a lot of weird interactions that happen there if you try to parry it or whatever. You get pushed, it changes something about your character's hitbox or animations, and this can cause you to get hit when you wouldn't normally have been hit by another fireball. It also means that Rose gets one weird ability. She can force a fireball spacing situation that suits her from much closer than everyone else can. And while you might not think this is super important because she does end up mostly still punishable or disadvantaged enough that it matters, being able to reset that every single time if she wants to is really important. Now, will she have that back in this game? It wasn't really shown. They didn't show what happens when you Soul Spark at close range as far as I know. I didn't see it in any of the videos. I should recheck them to verify, but a lot of what RoseBot is going to be about will depend entirely on whether or not there is any version of Soul Spark that pushes you out. Even the heavy one, which often takes so long to start up that you could interrupt it, you're still going to face the same problem as with Lucia, because Lucia also does fireballs that technically take forever to start up, but have enough control in a way to cause a problem. Still not using that meter, huh? Well, their call.
Alex wins.
If Rose does not have this ability, it's actually going to be harder to use the tools they did give her, so I'm basically expecting it. Being able to push people out with the Soul Spark and then backdash into a better zoning position, which will then cause the opponent to become cautious, which is itself time to use her V skills, would be the game plan I'd expect them to make available as her first order strategy, but it's not necessarily one that I would need to put into a bot. If the ranges work out such that you can get in on her safely, you'll check that in the frame data, then yeah, I'll add that to the bot as the main strategy. But if not, since that's going to be a lot more about player skill, the main strategy is probably going to be about pushing the opponent to a spot in neutral where things are quiet, and then delaying a hit of the medium punch, so that she spends some time blocking, doesn't open herself up too much, and often backdashes or similar, getting control of the situation the other way. Just delay long enough that she could hit her heavy punch without worrying about someone else doing something. This means that if you mash against RoseBot in my current expectation, you're probably going to do pretty well. But I should have her block long enough, and from the sound of it, she's going to be able to build up the meter well enough that she probably will have one of her larger abilities as the bot to just be her V reversal. Should work out, given that I believe she will have the new Soul Slam, Soul Snatch. Basically, she no longer goes up into the air to do Soul Throw, which gives her even more spacing control, but does leave her slightly more open, because before, if you jumped at her and she mistimed with the Soul Throw, you still only got an air reset. Now, if something goes wrong, you're going to get a full jump in combo. So I expect Rose players to be somewhat stressed by this, but most likely the ES version is going to be air invincible, and honestly all of them are probably going to be some form of invincible to air attacks. But you can never be completely sure, because while they did show it off, there's no specific reason why that move would have 3 different strengths, so we'll see what they come up with. That, therefore, is also going to be super important. The strengths available to Rose for that move are going to be really important. It's relatively hard to put in an edge-shifted uppercut motion anywhere, but not so hard
Round 1. Fight.
that we may not require people to do it. After all, this is a fairly late-in character and probably has a fairly esoteric moveset. Not likely to be something that you pick up because you want to just do beginner stuff, and therefore are not likely to be enough of a beginner yourself to have more than 10 minutes maximum trouble inputting the specific thing I'm talking about. If it turns out, therefore, that both Soul Spark has different properties, some push back, not, and that the new move also has this sort of thing, you're likely to see slightly less of Rose's kicks as the start up of things. This will then come down to a question of, okay, if she has very specific requirements for which soul spiral she uses for things, we'll work out something there. Maybe I'll manage to sneak in some stuff with holding buttons to get options of the skill versus slide versus uppercut, medium. Help that get in there a little bit. Neither her super nor her main uses of tarot cards seem to be super helpful there, so you should be able to get that in. Meaning that we probably one of the inputs is going to start with down, forward, medium punch plus medium kick, and somewhere else you will be holding a medium punch, somewhere beyond that you'll be holding a medium kick. These buttons will probably go into the middle because Rose footsies is very precise, and there's not much you can discuss when it comes to giving the bot footsies. That is going to come down to checking specific little things in terms of spacing and so on as you go. I can autopilot Chun-Li while I talk, but I'm not sure I can autopilot Colleen while I talk. Then again, I should test whether or not I can autopilot Colleen, because that's important to know too. Colleen is obviously a character that has a lot more things she does. And while you don't have to spend all of your time trying to think through every bit of it, especially if you're playing someone who doesn't necessarily stress you in terms of their offense, it is still important for this. So, okay, it looks like we have Alex again, which means I should probably use this instead. Another situation where the decision to play Alex is probably worse than playing Nikali. But you can't be sure of that because Alex's ability to do things that I can react to in time more so depends on me. One thing I will say for those who try to play this matchup is that unless you've gotten a good concept of how to play the Hail game from far away, even if the Alex player retreats, you don't necessarily get much out of this.
Okay, let's rumble.
But Colleen negates so much of Alex's footsies by just doing this in neutral that she doesn't have to worry a lot.
Fight!
But no, it looks like I'm going to end up not talking while I do this. Colleen is too slippery for Alex, basically. I can make mistakes, of course. And it's better from the Alex side to wait for me to do that, but then I'll just throw a lot.
Round 2. Fight!
Fat dash? No. That's a tendency Dewolf will have over time, so you can expect to have a decent chance here from his side because he will wait for me to just make mistakes. But it's probably better if I don't win this match, so I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to it. Unfortunately, it is true that I'm focused enough that I'm probably not going to talk about Rose for the next bit.
Looks like I won. Alright. Final round. Fight!
I'll take it. Wait, was that one round? One match? Aw. Well, let's try it. Rose Footsies depends a lot more on when you've decided to have her hit the stand heavy kick. This move normally makes up a large part of her ability to reach very far forward, similar to how Alex uses his. And you won't generally be able to do much else when trying to set up that situation, because she has long enough animations that you normally have to care. Her general way of setting up this move, though, doesn't help most people because they just get hit with fireballs instead. This is why, of course, you don't have as much time to react with her other fireball absorption moves when you're doing this. She will be able to do these things, but the spacings for which she wants to do them don't match up to the standard flows. She can't just do Soul Reflect in neutral while also at the space to want to hit the heavy kick.
Round 2. Fight.
If she does this, what will normally happen is the player you're facing off with will do a fireball, force you to respond, find that you manage it, and then do a different move that reaches around the same spot in the same space. And it will work out because there's no real reason not to. Never let yourself do that, because I can in fact counter the air thing if you do yourself. Colleen players will happily show you all the ways they can counter you out of your own escape counterattacks. I believe it is one of our favorite things to do in the world. Technically winning is probably not what I should have done there, as I noted. I could try segueing the thing I'm talking about into this, because Colleen does a lot of similar things. Which is why, for a while, I could play Rose well enough, maybe, to get somewhere. So, let's try looking at it from that perspective. And that should let me maybe talk and play at the same time. After all, this is the sort of trick one does in life all of the time. Connect two things that aren't normally connected, save yourself some processing mentally. You could consider that Colleen's heavy kick and sniping kick, her back heavy kick, are very similar in uses to the same things Rose wants to do. They're buttons you throw out at your opponent's head because you think that they are going to try to get to a specific spot, instead of using any other options. It's very important that you must believe that your opponent wants to get to a spot instead of using any of their options. Don't use this as your first strategy. And that also is reflected in bot work. If I want to make my opponent want to come forward, and this is poison, so that's even less likely, I have to do something to make them want to come forward. But let's go with that. Let's go with this as my primary reason why my opponent would want to come forward. Poison does have slow enough abilities, and Colleen is tricky enough in the movement here, but I can do this enough for their thought process to be, okay, I should probably get a little closer instead of standing over here and letting you do that. And there we go. Now, I can still of course mess that up in other ways, but the point was to get them to the point where I get to kick. And the kick, again, must be that moment where I think my opponent wants to get to move. So, forgive me Dirt Clean Man TTV, but I'll be repeating that move a little bit. Not always the same version either.
Round 2. Fight.
I missed it, but I think that's because of the EX flow. So now, my spacing and their intention are such that I can probably kick more. I might not get to hit any hits with it, but Rose isn't necessarily trying to hit you with it either. Rose is trying to create a situation that suits her by hitting the kick. And as you can see, Colleen manages this pretty well too. It's not that Poison can do nothing after that kick, it's that Colleen is advantaged enough that nearly everything
Colleen wins.
that Colleen does will find a way to stop everything Poison wants to do. You have to take some risks if you're not confident in what exactly that will be, because you have to hit inside slash like that. But that closes so much of the space, you might not care. Almost had it. But I probably should have just hit stand heavy kick. The problem here is that I want to use sniping kick for everything and it's not a good idea. The neutral jump did a good job, but I think the sniping kick might have hit. So Rose is doing much of this sort of thing. She is trying to hit the move for when you neutral jump, for when you end up in those spaces and so on. But mostly, she hits this move because she thinks you're going to try to advance a little bit from far away, and it's to her advantage if she hits you with the max range kick. This is going to make it harder to set this up in the bot, because it means you must be using the bot in a way that would cause the player to have an idea. If you can't convince yourself to do something correctly there, you're not going to get anywhere. You can, of course, as the player developing the bot for your own purposes. Just make sure that you do think that way. Give yourself a point system that makes you think that way. But if you're the type that slowly loses your focus on things like that, you're gonna have to be really careful with it. It would help if you have some way of, partially at least, convincing yourself to stand at the spot where Rose hitting the kick is a good idea, because if you can't do this, and convince yourself as the player that you must also advance in that moment, for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to get the most out of the bot because you can't simulate another player well enough. Now, this may all be thinking way too hard about something that doesn't end up being one of Rose's main strategies to begin with, but it's always been one before. Oh, they headed out. I hope it wasn't laggy, because generally things are good.
Let's do this.
Justine is much more patient and not as likely to want to try to get in the first place, so I'm not really going to be able to demonstrate the kick as much. Rose in the same position, where Rose now believes, you are not going to advance, I don't have to care, I get to move forward. Unless they've changed something, she's much more likely now to hit her own stand medium punch. From my looks at the character, that move looks a little shorter than I'm used to. Maybe that was the one they managed to convince someone there to nerf. But the style Rose uses means that it ends up being a good whiff punish style counterpoke, and she can often combo well from it, with one great part of that being that if she does, and has any skill at it... Oh, she found the heterochromatic one, obviously. This is what Rose wants to do here. Just hit this and create the same scenario. I'm out here, but I've hit the medium punch, and you don't get to do much because of that. See, this is my expectation. I'm fighting someone who I expect to have the sniping kick when I think they want to get in. But again, note that this is still double-sided. This isn't a change. This is, I have an opponent who I believe is more likely to want to get in the other way. By getting out into a perfect position and then doing something. Unlike Colleen, where actually the best thing to do on Colleen in the same situation I'm talking about is just hit crouch medium kick unless you think your opponent is going to come in from somewhere higher. Still working on it. Rose generally doesn't have any equivalent button. Her slide will do the job, but you won't get anything off it, and if you get blocked, unlike Colleen where, oh, I'm just plus, I do what I want from here. Bat dash? Nope. I read that happening all too often, especially against people who don't bat dash normally anyway. I do at least have enough self-control to not do it unless I have a massive life lead. But, still working on it. The same thing comes into bot design, really. If you want the bot to convince you to do something, it has to have just enough craziness to deal with all of your options, even if it's not that those things are often themselves good options. So sometimes the bot has to just do crazy nonsense because it's better than not. A good way to think of it is a bot always has the life lead. By design, a bot always has the equivalent of the life lead. So you should never think about it like, well, no one would ever do this. In fact, you have to realize that there are people like me in the world. People who will go, I have mostly defeated you. This game isn't fun if I don't do crazy stuff sometimes. What do I get to do today? and I spend half my health on getting to do some new crazy thing, because maybe it'll work and I'll look cool, or maybe I'll just get to have more fun in some way. Especially if they've managed to get any V meter at all while doing all that. Because when you hit them, especially if you land one big combo, now your V meter is gone, you probably used your other meter too. Unless you got a setup out of that, you might be in trouble. Because now you've given your opponent the same options. It depends by character. Some characters can just do this because once they've got the situation, you are in a lot of trouble. And at other times it shifts the other way. In terms of variance, therefore, it's going to be a lot about your understanding of your own personal control of yourself. G is not a character who's going to care a lot about stand heavy kick on Rose. It might not be worth removing, and that's why we do such extensive testing a lot of the time, because you're aiming more so to set up the bot so that the rhythm of the bot changes based on the character that's fighting. Unfortunately, we can still only have as much data as we can get from the group style, and Rose is not going to be super available to a ton of people since not everyone bought Champion Edition, and even if they did, if the bot's particularly hard to input, I'll end up getting a lot of different data about different rhythms, but I might not easily be able to set a given rhythm to exactly what I want. This is also going to be important in bot development as a whole, because you might think that a certain set of things combines well, but you don't have the timing quite right, and you can't tell that innately. There's no easy way to know one way or the other.
I'll fight this battle. Why? Because it is my duty. Round one.
This match is so complicated. I'm probably just going to lose this because of the amount of thinking I have to do just to do it. That sort of nonsense is required, basically. But it is similar to how Karine works with Tenko in spaces. A lot of it is making G react and then going through with the medium vanity step and doing the right thing after that. This again. Now we go for... there we go. And missed it. That was also fortunately a whiff punish, so it can work. But, you know, you gotta be ready. So you can expect that I'm probably going to stop talking about Rose unless I want to not have the match even be useful to the president. I can't be having it not be useful, at least. So, we're going to take that off the rails for a bit. Should in sniping kick. Right. You know what? It's easier to just do this the other way. Because this is a lot about maneuvering and not letting up. But if your opponent retreats out of the range of your craziness, you don't really have much choice other than dashing at them. Or trying to find some other way to get the throw.
Final round. Fight.
Oh, I dropped it. The goal here is not to throw the president constantly. The goal here is to make the president think so much about the throw that it is no longer possible to stop Colleen's arsenal of crazy nonsense. You can try just doing the fireball game, but she won't necessarily give you enough time to do everything you want from the fireball game. It is a more sedate and technically speaking better way of doing this. It is way less fun, and I can't really say it's a lot more effective. It's more something. Now obviously, as someone who doesn't like being zoned, I have a distaste to dealing with the fireball G, but it's more so that dealing with this form of G means I get to do one thing, and dealing with fireball G means I get to do 0 things. There we go. So it looks like we're gonna get fireball throw defense G, which is a good adaptation, but it's not necessarily going to lead to a better outcome. And this happens a lot in matches between the President and I, and the President and a lot of many other people in the group. It's not really that the situation improves, but rather that less things happen because the President is avoiding bad things happening. It is good for the rest of us though, because we do get to build up more concepts of how to get in and how to set situations to our preference. This, however, is, again, this is really not about me doing things. This is about me doing nothing because my opponent is trying to avoid every situation in which I get to do anything. So it's generally the sort of thing you change your flow for. Note here, for example, moving just completely away, continually. So, if your opponent has decided, I'm just going to retreat until you mess up, you have to look for chip damage, and from there, don't do anything. Because in this mode of thinking, the President has an offense score of very close to 0. If you can get any damage, it forces the opponent to go back to their own stressed state. They don't have the capacity to sit there and wait for things, especially if you can get it without them getting much meter out of anything. There we go. I have a hit. So now, you could say, well, the match is over. Of course, my skill at doing some other stuff is still going to matter a lot. So I've gotten to throw range now. But notice the additional mashiness that comes with this. And there goes the anti-airs. The opponent can no longer focus enough on everything that's happening to do the thing, because the other thing they're doing, they're setting up the situation where they're making you jump, so the anti-air is easy. When they're no longer making you jump, the anti-air is harder. Oh, dropped it again. Oh, it hits too long. I deserve that. And I deserve that because I failed to confirm. But it's mostly a reversal of the situation. I had reached the point where I knew my opponent had to jump. And they were probably going to jump from far enough away that they would have time to land and block the V trigger. But I still have a move that's capable of reaching that space, so get used to this, because until you've gotten a ton of experience, you're not necessarily going to be able to beat an opponent who has all of these things in their mind. But it definitely was enough to make me stop talking about Rose. We can go back though to the fact that Rose doesn't get much off hitting stand heavy kick against a G player. His approach moves and Fireball don't care about any of this. So, if you had to do something rhythm-wise, the question would be, how can I get Rose to do Soul Reflect more in the rhythm? This implies that you have to have an input within the RoseBot that on one timing will do the stand heavy kick and on another timing will do different versions of Soul Reflect, which is quite hard, because the only way you can get different versions of Soul Reflect is for it to be at the end of the input and proceed into some other punch. Obviously this means you just hit stand heavy kick just before you do that, but what is the beginning of this input? What is the thing that Rose does at the start to make this unpredictable? Because you must hit something before that, or she'll just always hit the heavy kick in neutral. I wasted my meter. This matchup for Colleen is almost entirely about using your meter a very specific way, and I wasted it. Ooh! I'm not sure if that was intentional, but it was good. Cammy has so many good reactions to everything you want to do that the only thing you can do to get good damage off of her, because she's squishy, is to set up a situation where she can't throw you as a punish, but needs to check you so you can't do anything else, and then do your counter. This is basically non-negotiable, and yes, the Cammy player will absolutely sometimes just go for it anyway, realize that's what's happening, and mess you up. Plus, you therefore can't use any moves that are actually minus, because if you want them to be mashy enough for this to work, you can't have done any move of that type. And again, it's important that it be meter. Can't do this with a regular parry because they start in like 5.
Final round. Fight.
Inside slash wouldn't work either, therefore I've been testing whether or not I want to use that in this matchup one way or the other, because it doesn't help a lot. So your best option for an unexperienced Cammy, which I haven't been using because I don't really want to give my training partner the wrong impression, your best option is to do that. But you do it with light. And for some reason my mind does it with medium because, I don't know. It does barely any damage, it doesn't get you anywhere, but it is a good thing for the matchup as a whole, because Cammy doesn't deal super well with that move. She can reach, she can beat it, she can even punish it, but she's short and has those stubby arms. So she can at best usually hit stand light kick. Karine can also hit stand light kick. But anything beyond that, you might get something, because if you were not aware, Colleen's light version of that move is only -4. And the only reason that she doesn't abuse the hell out of it against every other character is because they'll whiff punish it and they're going to be in the position where whiff punishing it is easy and a good idea. Cammy is not often in that exact spot without the rest of the match already being in a state you like as the Colleen player. So I want to do that constantly, the same way I tend to beat Karine by hitting lightning legs repeatedly. That's the setup you want. Now again, your opponent will absolutely see this coming sometimes, but you don't have to counter. You're already in a relatively good situation. All you care is that they didn't try to hit buttons, punish you, or check that move. And it is another useful thing that makes them really, really thinky. Because basically going, oh great, I can't do anything here, and I have to think constantly. Ends up with that, for example. That was probably really bad for my opponent. We were both close, I can afford to lose the round, and she got to the point of using all her meter because it built up. This is another useful thing for you against Cammy players, because you will build up a lot of their meter. And if they're not super good at the execution for their super, other weird things will happen. Worse for Cammy, she does get the crouch medium kick, of course, but that's a mild counter hit. That's basically the sort of thing that happens when you're playing footsies anyway. And we continually teach people, this is important. If you were going to have to go back to footsies and probably take the same hit, don't care, just ignore it. We're now caught up in Cammy pace. And of course you can avoid having to deal with any of the walking around and possibly getting hit by that if you just keep going that way. But Colleen has a lot of good counters to you doing that, and I don't mean her actual counters.
Round one. Fight.
Though she lacks throw invincible options, if you have good enough execution, which I don't, because I don't remember how exactly it works, because the height restriction is in there somewhere. There we go. It could just be that I'm really bad at executing that these days. Because I've been training to do some annoying things with Chun-Li, but it's supposed to be the same input, so maybe Chun-Li has a different level of leniency on those things, which is probably right. Or it could just be, again, no, that's the height distance. No, it's definitely me messing that up. Which is sad because, again, my training partner isn't going to get to learn all of the things they can't do if I can't execute the escape. Because she just has to keep hitting buttons, and that is something Rinzern is very good at. So I have to go high octane so that we can extend the match a little longer.
Final round. Fight.
Cammy is not a good character against me to try that because she doesn't have to stand there. You might as well go straight for this move. And there we go again. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to scold her for this later because honestly, this match is pretty bad from her side. There's no way a regular Colleen is going to lose to this because there's just too much extra stuff going on. It's just that I don't like blocking. Oh well. It's probably better that I lost that so that she can play more and see if she can calm herself down more. Because while Cammy is a very active character, this is probably not the best way to do that. I, on the other hand, will go back to talking about Rose for the next 10 to 20 minutes until the stream ends. And we had left off, again my apologies for all that, at how to make Rose do either stand heavy kick or variations of Soul Reflect. For that we need to put some action that is about the length of the heavy kick in terms of its animation. We also need to somehow fill a space in terms of button pressing or wait. Waiting is usually not better for bots because if I tell a player to input a bot, press this, wait, there's no way to know how long they had to wait. If I tell them, press this, then press this, and then this, just by measuring human ability to move their hands or fingers, people on stick would have slightly better or slightly different rhythms, but most of the time, you're filling approximately the same amount of time. So, I most likely need to start with some regular attack with a fairly long animation, something preferably that would go well before a Soul Reflect. Let's guess at Rose's stand heavy punch, let's say. Or something that moves Rose backward, so that she has a good reason to do the reflect. So, I'd bet that I need some button, and we got fairly far into this because we were talking about what happens when Rose is in particular spaces to begin with. So let's think in terms of, well, let's try to get the medium punch in. Especially if medium Soul Reflect is not needed, you can do different things. Or if it is needed, you can count on Negative Edge sometimes. Negative Edge is one really helpful thing when it comes to bots. If you're not familiar with it, it basically means that when you release the button, the character still does the move. I.e., if I told you, hold medium punch, do a quarter circle back and let go of medium punch, most of the time, if your character has a quarter circle back punch move, they will do this move. Which might be an easy way to sneak this in for Rose without her constantly hitting medium punch on everything. So let's assume we did that. We have Rose hit her medium punch in neutral. She then hits something else, probably backdash, because this is a good timing for that. Backdash has an animation probably long enough to be almost exactly the same as the heavy kick. So, does the heavy kick come before? I think maybe. But that's not directly what's going to matter. You hit the medium punch and hold it. You hit backdash or heavy kick and then the other. And then you just do a quarter circle back and end the recording. What you should be left with is Rose, who, if you replay only that recording, constantly backdashes, constantly hits heavy kick, and never hits medium punch, because if you held the medium punch, the game will basically consider you to continue holding it as long as that input is continually replaying. Let's say you recorded it to action 3, it would mean that action 3 playing into itself would never hit a medium punch again. But combined with anything else, you might get the medium Soul Reflect. Some other combinations would also help. Anything that hits medium punch at the beginning gives an option, and so on. So we're getting into complexity now, but the idea is the same. We want Rose to do the heavy kick, and if she doesn't do the heavy kick for whatever reason, we want the Soul Reflect. In this case, we're specifically saying, I want to press medium punch. During the animation of this medium punch, nothing happens, she just whiffs medium punch. And then she does Soul Reflect almost immediately, because let's say we got the timing right between the heavy kick and the backdash. Yet, when you replay this, you won't ever see any medium punch, and you won't ever see any soul reflect. Those things are hidden in there, and you get to see a lot of bat dashes and heavy kicks. It also means that if Rose bat dashes, she will still probably recover in time to do the soul reflect, but the medium punch could prevent her from doing the bat dash part. So, sometimes she bat dashes into soul reflect, sometimes she punches and does soul reflect. Sometimes she does wake up bat dash, and sometimes she does wake up soul reflect. And yet, none of this absolutely has to happen because note that the way we chose to do this means she doesn't necessarily do the soul reflect. It would require her to play that into a different punch button. So optimally we have one thing that starts with heavy punch, one thing that starts with light punch, assuming again that we need all of the soul reflects. And two things that either start with kicks or start with nothing, therefore allowing for the negative edge to play out. So I've got some pieces already in mind here. A good thing to start with I think is throw, because I think just the way the game recognizes negative edge, it'd be good if a lot of the time Rose will only throw if she's been in a position where for some reason the game thinks she can't get the soul reflect off. It's not too likely to come up, but it is still there. Oh no! Is that a full crash or is it just me? My station has been disconnected from game server, but it looks like everyone else is doing fine, so assuming that was not entire net drop and I can still be heard, I'll head on back that way, even though I'm definitely not playing again before the stream ends. Whether or not things like Rose's super end up being important, a lot of the time those sorts of motions, if your character has shorter inputs for the actions, you might get super randomly somewhere anyway. RoseBot is like this, apparently. At least in certain people's input versions. Which is a little confusing because RoseBot doesn't actually have any like quarter circle moves in the first place, but I can see why it might happen. It would take a very specific sequence of replays, but I've seen RoseBot do super today, so we know that it is still a thing that happens.
Round one.
The main important thing is going to be finding all of the timings for Rose to get all of those V-skill uses. And it seems like I'm going to have to find ways to get in two different V-skill things in order for the tarot cards to work. A down forward medium kick hopefully will be enough. Down forward V-skill will hopefully be enough to trigger the change. And I can hide that by holding different things to make sure that she doesn't constantly do this and is more likely to throw it. But I'm still going to have to find a spot where she's likely to throw it. At this point we're getting into really complex theory though, so I'm not necessarily going into too much of it. Just understand that there's a lot of requirements for placement of things very similar to what I just described. You are aiming to create a rhythm based on the sequences you want the bot to do without directly inputting those sequences as just, hey, the bot does this. And of course you can wait for ours to come out, but it could be complex enough that you have to wait more than 1 week for it. It depends, again, on her main strategies. Since bots don't really need to be able to do flashy combos, most of the time complex bots won't have their flashy combos because I managed to fit in the flashy combos more so when the bot doesn't do a bunch of complicated things and I just have time to brainstorm up how to get them to do it occasionally. Big specials and things that come off the trigger activations are much easier to do this for. Although it does not generally make it anywhere easier for the player trying to use the bot to input it, it's often irrelevant. No one specifically cares whether or not Akuma bot has Demon Super. Kage bot is much harder to input because Demon Super is actually part of Kage bot. It's intended to be a thing you work with and work on, but it's not any easier to input. So we put in a lot of effort into making sure that it's as easy as possible for the player to create the Kage bot able to do the Demon Super. But that's because Kage bot is simple. Kage's game plan is a simple matter of skilled conversions and spacing and jumps. So once we got that out of the way, there wasn't a whole lot of time spent just getting Kage to do all of his moves correctly. A little bit was difficult, but he also didn't need to do every move. And a lot of that is going to come around with Rose as well. If for some reason Soul Spiral's 3 versions really matter, you're going to find that the bot will take a lot longer to develop than if, yeah, one of them technically does more damage than the other, you'd want to do a big conversion with the heavy version when you can, but the move's overall function is the same no matter what, and I only therefore need the bot to have one of them. I'm really hoping that I only need the bot to have one of them. Rose doesn't have a lot of tricky approaches that then need to be factored in and put into their spaces, which is a good flow to be able to go with. She does have slide, she does have probably Soul Piede, which is her lateral kick propped up on Sash. Very useful move, but you're not likely to see it in the bot all that much because while it is really good for footsies, I'm not expecting RoseBot to be super strong in footsies. I'm going to work in what I can based on the stand heavy kick, stand medium punch, and possibly some light kick and slide stuff. I think her light kick is often good. It's going to depend a lot on the frame data for that one though. And of course, a lot is going to come down to whether or not she needs EX moves, because fitting all of that in can be even harder. But experiment with it yourself, especially if you experiment with it without the EX moves, because if you put in other bots, you can go back and look at those to directly recognize, oh wait, this is how you could probably do that. I could hit this button and hold this button. It might be frustrating to have to redo some inputs, but it's much better this way because you start off with much simpler ones that you can keep on tweaking the timing for and checking. And then when you're confident that the flow is overall the way you want but some EX moves are missing, for example, then you go back and re-record them with the extra button presses, deciding which buttons to hold, and so on to increase the functionality of the situation and the bot. This of course will also affect whether or not the bot will quick rise in place. Mostly you'll manage to get the wake up, the backward wake up, from any number of other little things you're inputting. There are very few bots that won't even have backward wake up, simply because of the number of ways you can activate that. But it is a little harder to activate quick rise in place. I can't imagine Rose being super into this as an option though. She generally wants to move slightly further away from the opponent, so if we don't get that in, it's probably fine. You might specifically not want to do it. But note that I said before, she's really likely to need that V reversal. And if her V reversal turns out to be punches, then you're going to end up with this either way. Where you put it determines how many EX moves she has. But it's no longer a matter of, does this character have to use this or not? You have to use the V reversal. If it's kicks, we probably are going to get away with it. In fact, it might be where the Soul Piede comes from. If her jump-ins aren't so great, it won't be too helpful, but she does have Air Soul Spark now, so she has to jump at least a bit. You're going to have to work in some concepts from Falk Falk is useful because she has some really good timings for her hidden jumps. But try not to over-complexify it. It can be very stressful to try to work in things like back dash into forward jump. Forward dash into forward jump is hard enough. And we use multiple bots that have that. Mostly they'll be in the advanced version when you're used to inputting all this sort of thing and retraining your mind to hit unfamiliar sequences that are not your own character's combos. That can be one of the hardest things, I think, when dealing with a new bot, getting the inputs right. If you don't play the character, which none of us do, or the bot's sequences are not a combo for that or any other character, testing tends to take a bit longer. It's hard enough to teach yourself the timing for our actual combo that you can get feedback for. It's way harder than that to get yourself to do the timing for something that isn't even comboing and you can't even see half the things because it's intended that way.
Round 2.
If you do come up with anything good, you can let us know. The contact page at 2-mk.org is open. And of course you can DM us on Twitter at 2_mk_FGC. I am not sure if Camibot training led to that or not. Because you can train to throw a Cami, but the Kali's command grab is 8 frames. That might honestly make it easier because you can just react earlier. Everyone else has to kind of wait. Note that you shouldn't do this too much, you have to learn the range for it. You can't just throw her every time because you get a relatively large amount of leniency, but anyone who plays Cammy seriously will just space herself so that it doesn't work.
Final round. Fight.
So Rose is going to be very demanding. Between, oh, I need to work in throw, a good jump timing, some footsies, possibly different soul reflects, possibly different versions of her new move, which I really should know the name of by now. Might need different soul sparks even, but of course it'd probably be coming along with all that rest of stuff. And 2 different inputs of both V-Trigger and V-Skill. This is going to be a jam-packed bot with some relatively long inputs. Hopefully the sequences will not be too bad. I'll do what I can to lessen the complexity of certain variants so that you can try it without them.
Round 1. Fight.
And work out some rhythms that get to use the buttons in question for more than one thing, even if it doesn't make the moves optimal. Just so we have better acceptable variants than we normally do for bots. We haven't been doing the acceptable variant a lot lately, because we've been facing a lot of bots with very precise game plans, instead of moves you have to learn a lot of different little properties of. So even with Dan, for example, where the main thing you have to learn is Dan will want to do this, you still have to put in some other stuff for, oh yeah, you should probably learn how to punish this too for when they mess something up. But those don't have to be in good places. Rose might be the same. She has a lot of moves she needs to do so that you can see them, so that you can get used to how to deal with them, so that you can see their ranges. But they don't necessarily have to be executed as part of an actual game plan. Just enough to give you familiarity. So if she occasionally just does something that doesn't make sense, it might work out. This is more so still advice for your own building. If you think that a move isn't super important, but you have a space to somehow get it in without disrupting much else, just throw it in. I think our biggest problem is going to be figuring out where to put that uppercut motion. And of course, the stress of inputting that uppercut motion. Most likely it's going to go after one of the punches, because if you throw out Soul Spark and your opponent jumps, well, that's generally when you want to do that sort of thing. It's always sad to lose a match because you dropped the combo but you had full meter. It's easier on characters who don't use their meter for approaches or huge conversions, but it's still always sad.
Round one.
So to summarize, we've got one definite-ish input meant to give Rose stand medium punch, stand heavy kick, and various versions of Soul Spark. Soul Spark I think is a forward move though, so it would actually end up being stand medium punch, either backdash or heavy kick depending on the timing, then the other of either backdash or heavy kick depending on the timing once again. And then whatever motion is required to do Soul Spark, which is normally a full, I believe it's normally a half circle full, but we don't know what they'll do this time. What is helpful is that this overlaps with Soul Spiral, which is also usually a quarter circle forward, meaning that you won't have too much trouble getting that done. And the recording that way, and you've got the basis of it. The basis normally goes into Action 3, because it's normally easy to input, and allows you to mess around with Action 1 and 2 without having to think about the fact that you're using Action 1 for something else already. She most likely needs a jump, possibly 2 jumps. She definitely needs 2 different inputs of the skill. You probably have to hold the medium punch during Action 3 for this reason, so that you could get like down forward medium kick and get slide in the same space. So one of these V skills is almost certainly going to go at the beginning of one of her inputs. Also, you could hold it a little bit to suppress the Soul Spark, I believe. Or if you wanted it there for some reason, you could press medium punch plus medium kick normally and release only the medium punch. Yeah. And continue to hold the medium kick. We're now going to our last on-screen match of the night. The lounge is probably going to stay open for a while longer. I can't say when it will actually close, but we don't normally go any longer than 9:40 Eastern Time, so you've got another 40 minutes to get in. People may drift in and out or start not taking their matches and drop to back, so if you do join this lounge now, if you didn't want to be on stream but still want to get some matches with us, you can hop in and watch for your turn, or at least watch at the end of matches to figure out whether or not the person who was up next is actually confirming in, or if you're going to get to play. If you want to just play Kumite round robin and fight everyone, let us know. We can be pretty accommodating about that. We've already gotten most of our practice for the day and can generally drop to back and rotate around so that you can fight more people.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight.
But you can look out for our prototype RoseBot based on the principles I've said so far in this stream. Probably on the day she releases. More so toward the evening, probably stream time. you get a tweet about that instead of an actual stream. We do normally let you know that we're going to stream at around stream time. On Twitter, as mentioned, _MK_FGC. But prototypes normally come out through that as well, since we don't usually go through the effort of putting the prototype onto 2-mk.org. When you see RoseBot appear, when you type in RoseBot after that URL and you actually get a bot, you should be able to assume that the bot is either done or far enough in that we're calling on other people to help us work out what's wrong with it, or similar. We're not going to put up an unusable version, except if we make a mistake. So let us know what you get out of that when the time comes, because we do generally try to improve things, and especially add variants when, let's say, your character has just such an incredible advantage against a certain move Rose does that she would never use it. For a character as complex as Rose, the main issue is that could be any move. Normally, there's one move that you could just look at it and go, okay, so zoners don't care about this move, so we should create a variant for zoners, because we know that zoner players are going to think this is wasting a spot. We could get something better for them in there. But with Rose, you can't be sure of that. You can say, well, my character doesn't need to care about solar flat, my character doesn't throw any projectiles, or stand at the spaces where Rose will try to hit this move. Similarly, the same action 3 is exactly what I was pointing out there. The first time I mentioned it, it was a Soul Reflect. Second time I mentioned it, it was Soul Spark that I said. There's no way to know which one is going to end up in the bot. I'm hoping for Reflect because it goes in that space, but if you decided, well, my character doesn't throw projectiles, but Rose is therefore more likely to. She doesn't care about Soul Reflect, she just wants to throw more projectiles at me. There's really little harm in having extra Soul Spark in there. So look out for the variants, look out for the specifics of this character type, or even stronger descriptions of a play style or play type. Use this one. Fight. But of course, feel free to test out other ones. We'll try our best to make it so that the ones you have to care about are also easy to redo if necessary, such as the action 3 I mentioned. Being able to change that in any given session is a matter of being able to re-record one thing that probably won't be too hard to time or do. We'll keep all the complex stuff probably in action 2 or 4, where they normally go. I doubt Rose is going to have any really great modifiable action 5 slot. At least not without an entire essay to explain why. But I like writing those, so you might be subjected to a wall of text or two. I suggest only caring about that once you've gotten used to it and already have a complaint. Something about the bot that you think is not necessary or doesn't do enough for helping you learn to play the character. You might be able to find that you come back to the page and notice or find something that you didn't see before or didn't pay attention before. That resolves your problem. But between the perfect, acceptable, variant explanations, I'm expecting this to be a very long and very complex bot page. Which also means that if this testing is not done before Saturday night, again, you may be waiting another week or half week for the bot itself and have to rely on the prototype. It's maybe one of the few bots where we update the prototype somewhere. This is all speculation though, all Wild Rose speculation, because we don't know what they're going to consider important for her moveset. And if there's been frame data somewhere, I don't think I've seen it. A lot of these things have to be felt out when you do them though, so you're not necessarily going to be able to say, well, the frame data says this, therefore the bot should do this, or maybe the bot should do this way. It's a good start, but it's not usually enough. That said, if you are listening to this on our YouTube before we have a disc guidance or more comprehensive stream, before we even have a prototype maybe, or using this as backup for helping you understand the prototype reasoning, feel free to think in that way. But as it is, G fits right in this stage, and Cammy's, I guess, dressed for the occasion compared to her normal. I could see her wearing this sort of thing to this sort of place. Cammy also gets to do a lot of dash up throw in this matchup, but she's a little easier to check than Colleen is because she's more straightforward in the mid-range. You don't have to worry about overheads, for example. It's absolutely not worth using the trigger just to get them. And instant dive kicks, while they would be great, they don't often help that much against G because the position G stands in. If you're lucky, you'll get a +1, but more likely you'll whiff or get countered. That said, EX ones really help, and she does have a lot of meters, so might still be a way. But as you've seen, just even G being G. You lose. That brings us to the end of our stream for tonight. Hope you enjoyed it one way or another. Look out for information on Rose when she releases, and a bot hopefully less than a week after that. This has been Rillian 14 2MK